Welcome to Podkey Slopcast, where this week AI abundance starts looking a lot more rationed. A lot of this week's stories look separate on the surface: budgets, model launches, open weights, workflow advice, hardware stocks. Underneath, they all point at the same question: what happens when AI stops being a flashy demo and starts colliding with real limits? The big structural shift is from AI as a subsidized buffet to AI as a metered utility. The reported reason matters. Earlier AI use was mostly query-style work. One prompt in, one answer out. Agentic workloads are different. They chain steps, call tools, retry, inspect, and keep going, so token consumption can jump by orders of magnitude. If that's true, then the old unlimited access posture was never a stable equilibrium. It was a growth tactic that made sense when usage was light enough, and it breaks once employees start running agents that behave more like junior operators than search boxes. That's the context for Walmart imposing token limits, and Uber reportedly capping AI spend at $1,500 a month, with similar controls showing up elsewhere. Those examples don't prove every company is in crisis. They do show something narrower and more important: finance and operations. Now see token consumption as a governable cost center, not a rounding error. And once that happens, a whole management stack follows: monitoring, cost allocation, approved model lists, usage policies, maybe even internal chargebacks. The trade-off is obvious. Budgets can force discipline and better prompt engineering. They can also suppress experimentation, especially by teams that haven't yet learned where AI actually pays off. So the interesting question isn't whether limits are good or bad. It's whether companies can distinguish waste from discovery. Tight controls too early may save tokens and lose capability. Anthropic's Fable 5 sounds like a real capability jump, especially on coding and reliability. The key claim isn't just that it scores better, it's that users can finish full projects instead of getting stuck in that familiar 80 or 90% zone, and even build complex products in real time during live customer calls. If that description holds up in broad use, it changes the economics of software work more than another benchmark win would, because completion is where automation starts replacing coordination overhead instead of adding to it. But then came the narrow jailbreak report and the US Export Control Directorate demand that Anthropic suspend Fable 5 for foreign nationals. Anthropic's response, temporarily shutting the model down for everyone, is the revealing part. It suggests the compliance path is still ad hoc enough that a targeted regulatory concern can become a generalized service disruption. There are at least two readings here. One is caution. Anthropic chose the broadest stopgap while it sorted out legal exposure. The other is fragility. Frontier model licensing may be less formalized than the market narrative implies. What's reasonably supported is the uncertainty. If launch risk now includes sudden policy intervention after release, that affects enterprise adoption, developer planning, and the incentives to open source less or geofence more. It also creates a strange contrast. The more capable these systems become, the more valuable they are, and the more likely they are to trigger improvised governance. The open weight story is getting harder to dismiss as a second-tier sideshow. China's GLM 5.2 is described here as a DeepSeek-style breakthrough that surpasses Opus 46 and GPT 5.2 levels. That's a strong claim, and without the underlying eval details, you shouldn't treat it as universally settled across every task. But even allowing for hype, the important part is simpler. There is now a credible narrative that open-weight systems can compete near the frontier, not just on cost, but on useful quality. The hybrid examples make that more concrete. Harvey plus Fireworks using GLM workers with Opus advisors, and OpenRouter's Fusion panel show the logic of orchestration. Let cheaper models do most of the volume. Reserve expensive models for review, arbitration, or hard cases. That's not just a clever engineering trick. In a token-scarce world, orchestration is a business model. It turns model choice from a brand loyalty question into a routing problem. The catch is operational complexity. Multi-model pipelines can lower cost and preserve quality, but they add failure modes, evaluation burden, and governance headaches. Somebody has to know when the cheap worker is good enough and when the premium advisor needs to step in. Still, the better supported argument right now is that single model supremacy matters less than it used to. If routing gets good enough, closed model leaders may keep the crown while losing some pricing power. The KPMG finding from 1.4 million workplace interactions cuts against the fantasy that elite AI use is mostly prompt magic. Their top impact users treat AI like a collaborative reasoning partner. They frame the problem, iterate, refine, and work with the system instead of throwing one heroic prompt at it. That's encouraging because it means the skill may be teachable, but it also means adoption is slower and more managerial than vendors often imply. Satya Nadella's point fits here: capture context, evaluations, and institutional memory. So the compounding value comes from learning loops, not just swapping in the latest model. That feels less glamorous than frontier launches, but it's probably the stronger long-term thesis. If your organization can't preserve what worked, model upgrades mostly reset the conversation instead of improving it. Then there's the Glean finding on bot sitting. An average 6.4 hours a week spent feeding context, checking outputs, and rerunning results. That number is a useful antidote to simplistic productivity claims. AI can save time in a task while creating supervision labor around the task. Both can be true at once. Anthropic's Claude tag in Slack points toward one-way firms are trying to absorb that overhead. Shared, team-invoked interfaces move AI from solo experimentation into group workflow, and Anthropic says 65% of its product team's code was produced through Claude Code initiated from Slack. That sounds impressive, but the missing context matters. Code produced is not the same as code accepted, maintained, or strategically valuable. Still, it does show that interface design and collaboration surfaces may matter almost as much as raw model quality. The hardware angle ties the whole episode together. June's market action favoring memory manufacturers is a reminder that AI isn't only a software story. Agentic workloads hit physical limits: memory, GPUs, throughput, and all the unglamorous infrastructure that determines how many tokens can actually be served. That makes token scarcity easier to understand. If demand explodes faster than memory and compute capacity, rationing isn't just pricing strategy, it's a symptom of bottlenecks. And when companies like SpaceX, Meta, and Google invest in dedicated compute, the issue becomes strategic. Access to hardware starts shaping who can train, who can serve, who gets low latency, and who can afford to keep products feeling unlimited. The second-order effect is political as much as technical. When compute is scarce and frontier models attract export scrutiny, infrastructure ownership becomes part of power, not just part of cost. So the cleanest read on this week is that AI is entering a harder phase. Better models are arriving, but abundance is not. Capability is climbing at the same moment. Governance, budgets, and hardware limits are tightening. That's the week in Podkey Slopcast. The headline isn't that AI is slowing down, it's that the constraints are finally visible enough that nobody gets to ignore them anymore. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.